Hello everyone, my name is Joel Washira and welcome to my channel. And as you know, in this channel we talk about history, maps, and we also give opinions. And today we are going to talk about the Berlin Conference. And in the late 1800s, Europe turned on Africa. And at this time, the German Chancellor Otto von Bismarck gathered 14 European leaders in Berlin to decide on the fate of Africa. And there was no single African leader in this Berlin Conference. And as you know, when they say when you are not on the table, you are on the menu. And Africa was on the menu. Despite Africa having some civilizations with leaders, elders, no one was invited in this scrabble and partition of Africa. No one was involved. And this was done so as to avoid conflicts among the European nations. And so they had to gather around and decide which country would take which part. And the British government got the largest share of Africa. It took the eastern part of Africa and the southern part of Africa. Then the French took the western part of Africa. Other countries got also the lion's share of African continent. And when they drew the maps, they did not consider about communities that were living there. And so they just drew lines on a piece of paper, and they became the modern borders that we know today. And this has continued to affect our continent hundreds of years later. And in 1894, like I said, the German Chancellor, he really wanted to avoid any war, and also the Industrial Revolution was happening in Europe, and so they needed gold, ivory, rubber, and also fertile land to grow, and oil and other minerals. Like, as you know, whenever something is becoming industrialized, the biggest challenge is raw materials. And so they knew that Africa was rich in raw materials. And there was one funny European leader who is one of the worst leaders in history, who is King Leopold II. What he did when the other countries were partitioning Africa for their own land, for him, he took DRC Congo, present day Congo, and named it Congo Free State, and he made it as his own personal property. Yes, he made Congo his own personal property, and he forced the locals there to work for him to harvest rubber. And the locals who did not meet the targets of harvesting rubber, they had their arms chopped off. And it is said that he managed to eradicate over 10 million people, and yet is never considered as among the worst people in history. And as you Google the worst person in history, you might find a certain leader from Germany, but King Leopold is never considered as the worst leader, because I don't know if it's because he killed Africans and he didn't kill other races. That's why. And away from that, let's go back to how these partitions happened. If you look at, there were communities like in Kenya, when Kenya went to the British and Tanzania went to the German, there are some communities that live on the border side. Like if you go to the Tanzanian side of the border, you'll find the people from the Maasai community. If you come to Kenya, you'll find the people from the Maasai community. And if you go to a place like Migori, you'll find the people from the Kuria community living in Kenya and in Tanzania. If you go to a place like Busia, even though Uganda was still part of the British Empire, it was a separate protectorate, which also divided communities between Kenya and Uganda. You find some people have relatives on the other side of the border, but they are still relatives even though there is a line separating them. Yeah, that's how bad things were. And another thing, some countries were never colonized, and one of those countries was Liberia and Ethiopia. And the reason why it never happened is because Ethiopia, for example, in Ethiopia, it was supposed to go to the Italians, but already Ethiopia had an established system of government. It was already an empire, and what really happened is that when Italy tried to invade Ethiopia, they were repelled away, and Ethiopians won the Battle of Adwa, which is one of the most famous battles in history, where soldiers with guns were defeated by soldiers who are using crude weapons and arrows. Yes, you can imagine a group of warriors with traditional weapons fighting another group of soldiers with modern weapons and beating them. And that made made European powers avoid Ethiopia at all costs. And that's why you find a lot of people from the Rastafarian communities believing that Ethiopia is the promised land because it was the only land that was never conquered by the white man. In another country that was never colonized was Liberia. And as the name suggests, it was about liberation. And this was a country that was founded by freed slaves by a president of the United States known as James Monroe. And that's why the capital of Liberia is known as Monrovia. And if you've been to Monrovia, like you might know it's named in the honor of that president. And Liberia wasn't a success story because of what happened. The freed slaves came to Africa and started oppressing the locals there, and they held power. The freed slaves held power for generations until the native Africans took power. And that explains how the Liberian Civil War came to happen, the first Civil War. And also how bad, I don't know why whenever an oppressed person gets power, they continue oppressing other people. I think it's a psychology that needs to be studied by experts. Like I've also noticed with leaders, whenever they are in opposition fighting for the people and then they get into government, they become what they were condemning. Like I never understood that. Like you become what you are against. Like it's as if you are jealous of that tyrant, like you are just jealous of him, you not being him. Then when you become him, you just doing whatever he was doing to people. Anyway, another thing is that the when they partitioned Africa, they started their own rules. They had direct and indirect rules, and they decided to show other communities as if they were superior to others. Like the Belgium, whatever they did in Rwanda, they made one community feel superior than the others, and that led to the genocide that happened. Another thing is that they villainized other communities. Like I said, they made others feel better, and also they made others feel worse. And this has continued to become a challenge today. And also they tried to ban African languages, like they wanted Africans to speak their language. And this explains why you can't even type in your own local language on your computer without it flagging it off as an English word. But if you type it in a European language, it becomes it's acceptable. But if you type it in an African language, it's not acceptable. And these are the things that Africans rebelled against, and they tried their best to keep their languages enough. And as we are headed right now, some languages are under threat because people don't want their kids to learn their own native languages. They just want them to speak these foreign languages, which makes our languages to be under threat. And yet it's our own language. That's what we own. That's who we are. It's our culture, and we should protect whatever we speak. Like speaking your own local language is not backwardness. Like that's what you are. That's your identity. Anyway, that was the story of the scramble and partition of Africa, and I hope to see you on the next video. And please remember to subscribe to my channel. And I've noticed like most people who watch are not subscribed. I'm trying to get to 1,000 views, to 1,000 subscribers, And when you do that, I'll really appreciate, and I hope to see you on the next video. Thank you.